very much. Very good. Thanks. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to.
No, maybe the.
Yes, just like this. Just like in this program.
Maybe you have to turn on the other microphone as well, Mr. Mario. Yeah, that's better.
I think so.
Yes. This one is closer to you. This one is closer to you. Yeah, it's better maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Journalists know better. Okay, once again, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you in today's conference titled Armenian Political Prisoners in Azerbaijan and the Imperative EU Engagement. This event, I'd like to say from the very beginning, that is hosted by my dear colleague, MEP Miriam Lexman, who is, by the way, the standing rapporteur on Armenia, coming from the largest political group, EPP, and myself, Kostas Mavridis, from S&D. So, in a way, we come, both of us, from the two largest political groups. This event could not take place without the inspiration, organization, support in all political and practical aspects by the European Armenian Federation for Justice and Democracy, and particularly by my dear friend, and I call him brother, because we've been around for quite a few years, the President Gaspar Garabedian and his team. Also, I'd like to welcome especially some of my colleagues who have been long-standing supporters of Armenia and also Nagorno-Karabakh, such as my good friend Lucas Koulas from EPP from Cyprus, Mr. Carlo Ciccioli, do I pronounce it correctly? Sort of. And anyone else from the European Parliament? Okay, and then we also have the pleasure of having among us a senator from Belgium, Mark Hendricks. Did I pronounce that correctly too? You better say yes. Yes. All right. Without further ado, just a short comment and I give the floor to Mr. Garabedian. I want everyone to know that the European Parliament has a very firm position on the matter. To summarize it, we had two overwhelming approved resolutions. And I'm just going to mention just a few sentences from those resolutions that were overwhelmed, almost 100% of the MEPs voted in favor. First of all, in our resolutions, we call for sanctions under the global human rights sanctions regime against all Azerbaijani leaders and officials committing human rights violations, in particular, prosecutors and judges, and we spell out the names. We have 3 of them specifically. On another paragraph of the same resolution, the European Parliament, we call on the International Criminal Court to investigate cases of the forced displacement, persecution, and ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, Ayad Artsakh, otherwise, and calls for the full implementation of all orders issued by the International Court of Justice. And finally, a last paragraph which I consider politically very important. As the European Parliament, we reiterate our strong call to suspend the 2022 EU-Azerbaijan Memorandum of Understanding on Strategic Partnership in the field of energy, and much more. Finally, to summarize the expectations of the specific committee which was set up for this reasoning, I adopted just one sentence from a letter that I received from them, which I agree fully. First, the safe and dignified return of the forcibly displaced people of attack. Second, the protection of our endangered cultural heritage. And finally, and most urgently, the unconditional release of all Armenian hostages. With that, Mr. Gargadian, dear brother, Kaspar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you also for Lukas, who is here. Lukas was the president of the friendship group with Armenia in the European Parliament, and both, as Kostas said, are brothers and very good friends. And thank you also, members of the Parliament, that you are here. Now I have the opportunity to meet later and have you with us also, I imagine, in this delightful cause. I would like to thank also Miriam Beckman. She will do the closing remarks because she is now in a committee, could not be here. And also I would like to thank I would like to thank also I would like to thank also our distinguished guests that are here. Mr. Simon Papuashvili, one of the directors of Ադրբեջան, Mr. Joel Welcome, one of the directors of Christian Solidarity International, Siranush Sakian, international lawyer, the lawyer of the hostages in Baku, and Armen Ishkanyan, the son of the speaker, the president of the National Assembly of Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh, David Ishkanyan, who is a hostage now in Baku. I will not take very long from the time. I welcome also our good friend Kostas Armanitis from Greece, 23, who has been with us as a journalist. We have had interviews in the past when he was a journalist in Greece, and I am glad that I see him again here. I will not take much of the time. I want just to mention one or two things that already Kostas did. Azerbaijan is using the hostages as a bargain chip to blackmail Armenia to have more concessions. And this is really unhuman. We had many resolutions from the European Parliament, and of course, you must all know what Armenia decided and told during we have good operation commission, but we stop any collaboration with the European Parliament because the European Parliament is biased against Azerbaijan. The European Parliament is honoring its mission, is honoring its duty, and is always defending the rightful causes. And we are grateful to the European Parliament, and we are grateful to the members of the European Parliament for what they are doing. I will give just one example about the sham trial, so that you understand what does it mean, a trial in Azerbaijan. One of the hostages that now are in trial, appeal, was born in 1993, but was accused for participating during the war of 91-94, participating to the war, and that were proven in the court during the trial his war crimes. He was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. Someone who was born in 1993 is imprisoned for 15 years for crimes that supposedly he did when he was just 1 year old. That's the rule of law. Azerbaijan, how understand the rule of law and human rights? I will not say no more, something more. Thank you again, all of you being here. And now we have the floor again. The reporters to continue.
I knew a lot about what's going on with the Lea regime, but what you mentioned now, the specific case, is out of any common sense. And I think it indicates from the very beginning that in Azerbaijan there is no justice, judicial justice, as we know it in democratic countries. It's simply an instrument of the Lea regime. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Simon Abuashashvili. Just, I'm going to read, everyone, I guess, has the short CVs. Do you? Yes. Okay, Mr. Abuashashvili serves as the director of the Eastern Europe, Russia, and South Caucasus program at the International Commission for Human Rights. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Constance. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important matter. My organization is based in Brussels. We work in the region, including in all Azerbaijan, rather, because we have not been allowed to go in Azerbaijan since 2021. Also, we work on Armenia quite closely. Perhaps I would like to make notes on the context in which we are discussing this important topic. And the context is that Armenian people have expressed their will freely on the June 7th in parliamentary elections, expressing their support towards country's European course. And Europe is also responding generously to this choice by offering possibilities to deepen economic, political, and cultural cooperation. And on this background, I think it's very important not to forget about Armenian captives who are held unlawfully by Azerbaijan. In my intervention, I will speak about two dimensions. One is legal categories or legal context, and another one is what the EU could or should be doing. Starting off with the legal status of the captives. I use the term captive deliberately. This is not a legal term as such, but it is a sort of an all-encompassing term which covers prisoners of war, civilian detainees, former political officials, and individuals against whom Azerbaijan alleges criminal liability. Their precise legal status must therefore be assessed individually according to the circumstances of their capture and their functions at their relevant time. For members of armed forces or other persons entitled to prisoner of war status, the third Geneva Convention applies. Where doubt exists, Article 5 of this convention requires that their status be determined by a competent tribunal, and until the determination is made, they remain entitled to the convention protection. Prisoners of war must be released and repatriated without delay after the cessation of active phase of hostilities. Civilians are principally protected by the Fourth Geneva Convention. Their internment is permitted only where the security of the detaining power makes it absolutely necessary. It cannot be imposed collectively or maintained indefinitely. Each detainee must have access to periodic review, and release is required as soon as the reasons justifying the internment or detention cease to exist. Unlawful confinement and hostage-taking are expressly prohibited under Geneva Conventions. Azerbaijan argues that some of those detained are not prisoners of war, but individuals responsible for serious criminal offenses, including war crimes. International law does not prevent the prosecution of genuine international crimes as such. However, even a prisoner of war prosecuted for conduct preceding capture continues to enjoy protection of the Third Geneva Convention. And one important dimension of the Third Geneva Convention is fair trial guarantees, which includes presumption of innocence, which includes principle of equality of arms, which includes right to have access to a lawyer, access to translation or interpretation where required, etc., etc. Unfortunately, Azerbaijan is a country where right to fair trial as such does not exist, and not only in relation to Armenian captives, but also in relation to its own population. My organization has documented now for almost 2 decades dozens, if not hundreds of cases of politically motivated persecution where this right simply does not exist. And I want to emphasize here, any person which is being brought to before the court in Azerbaijan cannot, by default, enjoy fair trial rights, and this is a very important consideration. There is also an unfulfilled political commitment. Paragraph 8 of the November 2020 trilateral statement expressly provides for the exchange of prisoners of war, hostages, and other detained persons. That commitment should not be interpreted narrowly or circumvented through the retrospective reclassification of conflict-related detainees. Moving on to the question of what the European Union should do, and some of those concrete steps have already been mentioned. This House has already taken principled position. In March 2025, it condemned the detention and trials, demanded release, called for medical and legal access, required international trial monitoring, and urged targeted sanctions against officials responsible for violations. In April of this year, Parliament again demanded the immediate and unconditional release of Armenian prisoners of war, detainees and hostages. The challenge now is to move from these resolutions or from declarations into implementation. And I would like to emphasize 5 elements here. First, the release of Armenian captives should become an explicit and measurable priority in all EU engagement with Azerbaijan. It should be raised systematically by High Representative, European Commission, the USR on human rights, and every visiting member state delegation engages with the government of Azerbaijan. It should not be relegated to confidential humanitarian discussions or traded against unrelated political concessions. Second, pending release, the EU should demand an immediate package of safeguards, which, among others, should include unrestricted access for independent humanitarian organizations, regular family communication, independent medical examination, confidential access to lawyers, access to the complete case files in the language understood by the defendants, publication of judgments or other decisions undertaken by the courts, and meaningful access to EU diplomats, international observers, and independent media to all proceedings. Third, the EU should establish a clear escalation mechanism. Azerbaijan should be given specific benchmarks and timeframes. Failure to meet them should affect the level of political engagement. A negotiation on future bilateral agreements or arrangements and access to the benefits of closer EU cooperation. The EU-Azerbaijan partnership priorities themselves identify respect for human rights, democracy and the rule of law as foundations of partnerships. Conditionality would therefore not introduce a new political demand. It would enforce commitments that are already accepted by both sides. Fourth, where credible evidence identifies officials responsible for torture, arbitrary detention, or serious abuses of judicial authority, the EU Council should consider targeted measures under EU Global Human Rights Sanctions Regime, as it has already been called by this House. The framework expressly covers torture and arbitrary arrest or detention and permits travel bans and asset freezes against responsible individuals and entities. Such measures should be evidence-based, of course, and targeted and linked to clearly defined remedial steps. Finally, the EU should present release not as a concession by Azerbaijan to Armenia, but as an investment in peace. The release of prisoners in January demonstrated that political decision can produce results. Completing the process would remove a major source of grievance, create confidence between the societies, and give practical meaning to the language of reconciliation. Peace cannot be sustainable while people captured in connection with the conflict remain imprisoned through proceedings that lack any credibility. The release of Armenian captives is not a reward for Armenia. It is an obligation arising from international humanitarian law, international human rights, and commitments made by the parties themselves. The European Union has sufficient diplomatic, political, and economic leverage to make a difference. The question is whether it is prepared to use this leverage consistently. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Now we move to our second distinguished speaker. His name is Joel. Welcome. Just a short notice from his CV. He is the Director of Public Advocacy for Christian Solidarity International, an interconfessional human rights group which assists victims of religious persecution in 15 countries around the world. Mr. Welcome, you have the floor. Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Mapidas. It's a great privilege to be here today to talk to you all about this crucial human rights issue. Each of the 20 men who's being held in Baku right now is a human life, a person with a family who waits for his return. Each of these cases is a human rights emergency in its own right. But more than these 20 lives is at stake in this discussion here today. The imprisonment of these men must be understood as part of the larger project by the Azerbaijani state to destroy the Armenian community of Nagorno-Karabakh, also called Artsakh. The question of Nagorno-Karabakh is in turn tied to the question of what kind of international order will emerge from the period we are living in now, a period of protracted interstate warfare of the kind that international relations experts used to regard as a thing of the past. I'd like to begin today with a quote from one of the hostages who we are here today to speak about, Mr. David Babian, the former foreign minister of the Republic of Artsakh. It is the last public statement we have from Mr. Babian, and it was made on his Facebook page on September 28, 2023. Some context for this statement. This was 9 days after the armed forces of Azerbaijan launched an invasion of Nagorno-Karabakh. For 9 months leading up to that invasion, Azerbaijan blockaded the Lachin corridor, the only road connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to the Republic of Armenia, and from there to the outside world. The 120,000 Armenian Christians living in Nagorno-Karabakh were trapped. Supplies of food, medicine, and fuel dwindled to dangerously low levels, and the population began to suffer from hunger and preventable illnesses. The miscarriage rate among pregnant women in Nagorno-Karabakh tripled. On September 19th, Azerbaijan launched an attack on the entire territory of Artsakh. The attack quickly overwhelmed the local self-defense forces, and it also knocked out nearly all the communications networks in the area. The majority of the Armenian population was forced to flee from their homes to escape the shelling, but with the Lachin corridor closed, there was nowhere for them to flee to. For 5 days, the Armenians sheltered in place, unable to return to their homes to search for their relatives, unable to call their friends to check on them, unable to evacuate the wounded to the few hospitals that still functioned after 9 months of blockade. Armenians who did venture out risked getting shot or detained by Azerbaijani troops. Then, on September 24, it was announced that Azerbaijan was going to reopen the Lachin corridor. Anyone who wanted to leave Nagorno-Karabakh would be allowed to pass through the Azerbaijani checkpoint and find refuge in Armenia. But it was not known how long the corridor would stay open, and it was not known who would be allowed to pass. Nevertheless, the terror, hunger, and violence inflicted against the Armenian population was so great that virtually the entirety of them crammed themselves into whatever vehicles were available and still had enough fuel to operate, and drove down the Lachin corridor towards Armenia. Because of the congestion, a journey that normally takes 2 hours took most families 2 days, or even longer. As this exodus was underway, David Babian made his final public statement. He wrote on his Facebook page, quote, "Dear compatriots, friends, party members, you all know that I am included in the black list of Azerbaijan, and the Azerbaijani side demanded my arrival in Baku for an appropriate investigation. I decided to head from Stepanakert to Shushi today, Shushi being the city that was under Azerbaijani control." So he was saying he was going to turn himself in. Quote, "This decision will naturally cause great pain, anxiety, and stress, primarily to my loved ones, but I am sure they will understand. My failure to appear, or worse, my escape, will cause serious harm to our long-suffering nation, to many people, and I, as an honest person, hard worker, patriot, and Christian, cannot allow this. God bless our people. May the Almighty reduce their suffering and heal their wounds." End quote. I cite the statement today for 2 reasons. First, because it shows that the hostages we're talking about are not just victims. They've also behaved heroically and with great dignity throughout the events that led up to their abduction and since then. But the second reason is that this message shows that David Babian understood that in a very real sense, in 2023, the entire Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh was being held hostage. Mr. Babian knew that if he did not cooperate with the Azerbaijanis, they were ready to inflict even more punishment on the entire population. It was clear to everyone that ethnic cleansing was going to happen. There was no question of the Armenians being allowed to remain in their homeland. The only question was whether the Azerbaijanis would allow them to leave safely, or if there would be a general massacre or other atrocities. This threat was made quite explicitly by Elchin Amirbayov, a representative of the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, in an interview with Deutsche Welle on September 7, just 12 days before Azerbaijan's invasion. Asked by the reporter if his country was carrying out a genocide in Nagorno-Karabakh, Amirbayov replied, "A genocide may happen only if this clique of separatists continue to hold hostage their own population in order to get to their political goals." By this clique of separatists, Mr. Amirbayov was referring to the elected government of the Republic of Artsakh, 8 current and former members of which today sit in jail cells in Baku. If these men did not comply with Azerbaijan's wishes, Mr. Amirbayov said, quote, "A genocide may happen." In the event, on September 28th, the President of the Republic of Artsakh, Samvel Shahramanyan, announced that he would comply with Azerbaijan's demands and dissolve the Republic, in exchange for Azerbaijan guaranteeing free, voluntary, and unhindered travel for the Armenians. By any measure, in Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan carried out one of the most complete, most successful ethnic cleansing campaigns in modern history. In the space of 7 days, in September 2023, the population of Nagorno-Karabakh went from nearly 120,000 Armenians to less than 50. Today, there are probably 0. This conflict did not begin, of course, in 2023. It began during an earlier wave of ethnic cleansing in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 1991, Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh were facing blockade, regular bombardment, and deportations by Azerbaijani and Soviet troops. They responded by exercising their right to self-determination. They seceded from the Soviet Union, just as Armenia and Azerbaijan did the same year, and created their own republic, officially named the Republic of Artsakh. While the Republic of Artsakh remained unrecognized, for 30 years it was a reality on the ground. Through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the international community created a mechanism called the Minsk Group to resolve the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The Minsk Group was co-chaired by France, Russia, and the United States. This peace process took many turns, but through it all, the right of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh to self-determination was accepted by all parties as an essential part of any final peace settlement in the region. It is for this reason that between 1997 and 2020, the co-chairs of the Minsk Group regularly traveled to Stepanakert, the capital of Artsakh, to conduct official meetings with the political leadership of the Republic of Artsakh. Other representatives of the Minsk Group engaged with the leaders of Artsakh from 1992 all the way to 2023. Throughout the entire lifespan of the conflict, international institutions consistently approached Artsakh officials as legitimate dialogue partners, and rightly so. Today, many of these officials are being illegally held in Baku's prisons. These include former presidents Arkady Lukassian, Bako Sahakian, and Araik Harutyunyan, as well as former Foreign Minister David Babian. In Baku, these men have been put on trial on a range of preposterous charges, from genocide to financing terrorism to slavery. They have been subjected to show trials which fall absurdly short of minimal international standards of fairness. Their lawyers have not even been given copies of the final verdicts against them, much less the purported evidence of their guilt. But the true crime of these men is to have represented their people, to have been chosen to serve in a government established through an act of self-determination by the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. By putting them in prison, Azerbaijan is finalizing its goal of destroying the existence of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh as a people. 1 month after the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan boasted, "Many reiterated there is no military solution to this conflict. We have shown that there is. The topic is now closed." And this brings us to the crux of things, politically speaking. By not intervening on behalf of these 20 men, by not insisting that they be released, the international community is accepting what Azerbaijan has done. They are accepting that military force can be used to resolve conflicts, to nullify the right of peoples to self-determination, and to accomplish ethnic cleansing. If that were all, securing the release of these hostages would already be a matter of urgency for Europe and the European Union. But by staying silent about these hostages, Europe is in fact accepting something else. They are accepting Turkish hegemony over a strategically vital region. In recent months, there has been much celebration of Europe's warming relations with the Republic of Armenia. In May, a joint EU-Armenia summit and a summit of the European political community were both held in Yerevan, a rather ostentatious sign of deepening ties. But Europe has also been strengthening its relations with Azerbaijan, which is poised to become a key energy supplier and security partner. The European Commission has shown total disregard for Azerbaijan's atrocious human rights record, including the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. And Europe's warming ties with Armenia are based on Armenia's acceptance of a peace process with Azerbaijan shepherded by the European Union and the United States. This peace process has required Armenia to make enormous concessions to Azerbaijan. while almost nothing has been demanded from Azerbaijan in return. All this while Azerbaijan's leaders refuse to sign a final peace treaty and regularly refer to the entire Republic of Armenia as Western Azerbaijan and insist that its citizens must be allowed to settle there. Let us be frank. Europe's policy in this region is creating a weak Armenia. And a weak Armenia will be of very limited value to Europe. Europe's policy is also empowering Turkey. The Republic of Turkey is Azerbaijan's closest military and strategic ally, a state with which it shares a language and a common history. Azerbaijan's military has worked hand in glove with Turkey's military in its campaigns against the Armenians since 2020. Turkish and Azerbaijani leaders both use the slogan, 2 states, 1 nation, to describe this alliance. The NATO summit in Ankara last week highlighted how Turkey is moving to the center of decision-making on a whole range of economic and security issues affecting Europe. Given Turkey's severe democratic deficits and its high-handed treatment of Europe on everything from migration to Ukraine, Turkey's rise poses serious challenges to Europe, to say the least. The end process of Europe's current policy is that Armenia will be required to integrate itself into Turkey's regional security architecture in order to maintain a semblance of sovereignty over its own territory. This Armenia will have no ability whatsoever to act as a counterweight against Turkish interests in this key section of the Middle Corridor. Europe seems to think that it is gaining access to valuable new trade routes and energy supplies in the Caucasus. In fact, it is handing them over to Turkey. A strong Armenia could be a useful ally to the European Union as Europe seeks to navigate an era of growing Turkish influence and weakening international norms. In order to empower Armenia, European policymakers will be prudent to look for ways to make the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process less lopsided. Intervening for the 20 Armenian hostages in Baku would be an excellent place to start. Thank you very much.
Before we move to the next speaker, please allow me to welcome also 2 more of our colleagues, Mr. Gerov Anumans from the Patriots and Madame Maria Zakaria, a non-script. And now we move to Madame Siranush Shahagian. Please allow me to say just a first sentence. She's a prominent Armenian human rights lawyer with over 2 decades of experience in international litigation, judicial reform, and anti-corruption.
Thank you. Distinguished members of the Parliament, colleagues and guests, I thank you for the opportunity to speak today about Armenian captives who are currently held in Azerbaijan in full isolation from the outside world. And I also thank European Parliament for the resolutions which reflect the truth and justice. I'm a lawyer. I'm representing those captives before the European Court of Human Rights. Despite internationally recognized absolute right to provide unlimited, unhindered, confidential meetings with the clients, as of this date, none of such meetings were authorized by Azerbaijani authorities. Currently, 20 Armenians are held in Baku. Among them are 8 political and military leaders of Artsakh. They are not simply detainees in ordinary criminal proceedings, but they are effectively being used in relations with Armenia as an instrument of hostage diplomacy. In order to justify the prolonged detention and non-release, Azerbaijan has resorted to politically motivated proceedings and sham trials. These proceedings also serve a broader purpose: to rewrite the history of Artsakh, to criminalize its institutions, and to portray the very existence of Armenian self-governance in Nagorno-Karabakh region as a criminal enterprise. I will address the following four main issues. First, the legal status of Artsakh and why public service in its institutions, even in an unrecognized self-declared republic, cannot be criminalized as such. Second, the charges. Third, the fairness of the proceedings. Fourth, the conditions of detention and denial of independent access. Indeed, the Republic of Artsakh was not internationally recognized as a state, but lack of recognition is not the same as criminal activity. The UN Security Council resolutions concerning Nagorno-Karabakh did not declare the independence of Artsakh null and void. They did not call upon all states of the United Nations collectively not to recognize it, as the Security Council did it in other conflicts and contexts, such as Southern Rhodesia, Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, or Republika Srpska. Nor did they criminalize engagement with its institutions. For decades, the status of Nagorno-Karabakh remained a matter for negotiation through the OAS Minsk Group, co-chaired by France, Russia, and the United States. Representatives of the Minsk Group engaged with the representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh, including some of the very people now detained in Baku. Representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh also took part in meetings and diplomatic contacts at the international level. At that time, these contacts were not treated as unlawful, nor as participation in a criminal enterprise. They were treated as a part of internationally accepted conflict resolution process. The prosecution appears to treat the political and administrative existence of Artsakh itself as criminal, which is incompatible with the basic principle of individual criminal responsibility. The charges brought against them, political and military leaders of Artsakh, are extremely broad and in many respects represent a striking inversion of the factual and legal reality of the conflict. They include allegations such as planning and waging a war of aggression, despite the fact that it was Azerbaijan that launched the September 2023 military offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh. They include allegations of deportation and forcible displacement, despite the fact that the European Parliament and other international actors have characterized Azerbaijan's actions against the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh as ethnic cleansing. They also include allegations concerning the creation of a criminal organization, unlawful armed formations, unlawful crossing of the state border, terrorism, and other grave offenses. These accusations are not confined to specific acts. They are presented across a vast historic period and appear to attribute decades of conflict to individuals on the basis of their public or political role within Artsakh. This leads to a basic fair trial concern. Where is the individualized conduct? Where is the specific act? Where is the evidence linking that act to the accused person? Where is the causal connection? It is not enough to name a person, place him within a political narrative, and then attribute the entire history of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to him. Criminal responsibility cannot be based on collective identity, political association, public office, or the mere fact of having represented the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is why these proceedings cannot be understood as ordinary trials. They appear to serve a broader political purpose, to reverse the narrative of responsibility, to portray the representatives of a displaced and victimized Armenian community as the perpetrator, and to criminalize the very political existence of Artsakh after having emptied it of its Armenian population. Let me now turn to the fairness of proceedings. Long before the delivery of judgment, senior Azerbaijani officials, members of parliament, prosecuting authorities, and state-aligned media publicly described Armenian captives as terrorists, criminals, war criminals, members of a separatist junta. These statements presented guilt as already established. In some cases, they addressed the punishment that should be imposed. Armenian civilians were tried before the Baku military court. Trial of civilians by military courts is exceptional and requires very strong safeguards. Those safeguards were absent The case concerned a conflict in which the Azerbaijani state and its armed forces were themselves parties. The proceedings were formally described as public. In practice, however, international journalists, foreign diplomats, independent civil society observers, family members were not permitted to attend. Azerbaijani state media, however, were allowed to record and report on the proceedings. It allowed the state to control the narrative while excluding independent scrutiny. This brings me to the conditions of detention and the denial of independent access. Following their arrests, Armenian captives were held without contact with their families, without consular assistance, and without access to the international lawyers instructed to represent them. The International Committee of the Red Cross first visited them several weeks after their arrest. Thereafter, humanitarian access became increasingly limited, and the regular ICRC visits ceased in June 2025. Today, the only international humanitarian organization that had access to captives no longer operates in Azerbaijan. The detainees have received no consular visits or assistance from Armenia or from any third state acting on Armenia's behalf. In any effort to remedy the situation, relatives and legal representatives requested to establish protecting power or other third state mechanisms. To date, despite repeated assurances and ongoing discussions about the establishment of peace, Azerbaijan has failed to reach the necessary agreement to enable a neutral third state to visit or assist the Armenian captives. This is one of the most urgent humanitarian concerns before us today. There is also a recent and extremely important development before the European Court of Human Rights, which interprets Armenia and Azerbaijan relations in objective lens. In Viti and others versus Azerbaijan, the court delivered a judgment concerning war crimes committed against Armenian servicemen during the April 26 hostilities. The judgment confirms the beheading of a captured Armenian serviceman who was alive when taken by Azerbaijani soldiers. This judgment, together with other judgments of independent international courts, confirms the very war crimes committed by Azerbaijan against ethnic Armenians. Crucially, however, instead of apologizing for what was done, expressing remorse, or taking steps to execute the judgment, Azerbaijani diplomats have threatened not to implement it, calling it unjust. They do not and cannot genuinely deny the crimes established by the court. Instead, they attack the court for using the term such as the unrecognized Republic of Artsakh. Here is the dilemma. The same state that committed war crimes and has failed to ensure accountability for atrocities against Armenians is now presenting Armenian captives as terrorists, war criminals, through proceedings, domestic proceedings, that themselves amount to a flagrant denial of justice. Azerbaijan must not be allowed to replace accountability with victor's justice. A genuine peace process cannot be built on the imprisonment of representatives of a displaced people, the isolation of captives from their families and lawyers, and the refusal to execute binding judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. The European Union should make the release of the Armenian detainees a central condition of its engagement with Azerbaijan. Pending their release, the EU should insist on immediate and regular access to them by their families, independent lawyers, medical professionals, humanitarian actors, and neutral third country representatives. A third country visitation mechanism must be established without delay. Azerbaijan must consent to it, and Armenia must actively pursue and sustain it through diplomatic channels. The European Union has political influence with both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it should use them now to make clear that peace without justice is not a peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Shahidian. And now we move to our fourth speaker, Mr. Arman Ishkanian, who was born in the area, in a village in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, and he is the son of Tavish Ishkanyan, a leading political figure of Nagorno-Karabakh, held hostage currently in Baku. Mr. Ishkanyan, the floor is yours.
Եվրոպական խորհրդարանի մեծարգո պատգամավորներ, նոր գերազանցություններ, իրավապաշտպան համայնքի հարգելի ներկայացուցիչներ, տիկնիկի պարոններ։
Honorable members of the European Parliament, Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives of the human rights community, ladies and gentlemen.
Ես Արմեն Իշխանյանն եմ, Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի խորհրդարանի խոսնակ Դավիթ Իշխանյանի որդին։ Իմ եւ ընտանիքիս անունից շնորհակալություն եմ հայտնում հայ ռազմագերիների Ադրբեջանում եւ Եվրոպական միության ներգրավվածության հրամայականը խորագրով այս խորհրդաժողովի կազմակերպման համար։
On behalf of my family and myself, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for organizing this important conference entitled Armenian Political Prisoners of War in Azerbaijan and the Imperative of the EU Engagement.
Եվրոպական խորհրդարանում նման քննարկման կազմակերպումը այս օրակարգով հույս է ներշնչում, որ խորհրդաժողովը կարող է նպաստել Բաքվում պահվող հայ ռազմագերիների խնդրի հավելյալ միջազգայնացմանն ու նրանց ազատ արձակմանը։
The fact that such a discussion is taking place here in the European Parliament gives us hope that this conference will contribute to further internationalization of the issue of the Armenian prisoners held in Baku and, most importantly, to achieve their immediate release.
Միաժամանակ շնորհակալություն եմ հայտնում Եվրոպական խորհրդարանի նախորդ բանաձևերի կապակցությամբ, որոնցով Ադրբեջանը պահանջում է անհապաղ եւ անվերապահորեն ազատ արձակել հայ գերիներին։
I would like to also express my appreciation for the previous resolutions adopted by the European Parliament, which clearly called upon Azerbaijan to immediately and unconditionally release the Armenian hostages.
Սակայն ցավով նկատում ենք, որ Եվրոպական խորհրդարանի միանշանակ դիրքորոշումը էականորեն չի դրսևորում Եվրոպական միության գործադիր իշխանության քաղաքական վարքում, եւ մենք Ադրբեջանի վրա անհրաժեշտ քաղաքական ճնշում չենք տեսնում Եվրոպական միության գործադիր իշխանության կողմից։
However, with deep regret, we must acknowledge that the European Parliament's clear position has not been sufficiently reflected in the policies and actions of the European Union's executive institutions. We do not see the level of political pressure on Azerbaijan that is necessary to secure the release of these hostages.
Արկաժան ներկաներ 1990-ական թվականներից հայրս եւ այժմ Ադրբեջանում պահվող մյուս գերիները պայքարում էին Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի ինքնորոշման իրավունքի իրացման համար։
Distinguished guests, since the 1990s, my father, together with many of the Armenians who are today imprisoned in Azerbaijan, has been fighting for the exercise of the right of self-determination of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Հենց այդ նույն տարիներին Եվրոպական խորհրդարանը մի քանի անգամ ընդունել է անօտարալի այդ իրավունքը եւ համերաշխություն հայտնել Արցախահայության պայքարին։
During those same years, the European Parliament itself repeatedly recognized this unalienable right and expressed solidarity with the struggle of the Armenians of Artsakh.
1990-ականներին Արցախայության ինքնորոշման օրինականորեն իրացված իրավունքի հարկադրված ադրբեջանական ագրեսիային ստիպեց հորս նախ զենք ձեռքին պաշտպանել հայրենի գյուղը, ապա դասավանդել մի գյուղի դպրոցում, իսկ հետո նպաստել Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի Հանրապետության կայացման եւ միջազգային ճանաչման գործին։
In the 1990s, the Azerbaijani aggression against the legally exercised right to self-determination of the Armenians of Artsakh forced my father first to take up arms to defend his native village. Later, he returned to serve his community as a teacher in that same village school. Finally, he dedicated himself to contributing to the establishment of the institutions of Nagorno-Karabakh and to the pursuit of its international recognition.
Հայրս հավատում է, որ ազատությունը, արդարությունը եւ հավասարությունը հասարակական առողջ հարաբերությունների առանցքային հիմնասյուներն են և հակամարտության արդար լուծման վերջնական խաղաղության հաստատման գրավականը։
My father has always believed that freedom, justice, and equality are the foundations of healthy societies. He believes that these values are also the only true foundations for resolving conflicts fairly and building lasting peace.
Այն հավատն էր, որ հորս մղում էր աշխատանքներ ծավալելու նաև միջազգային հարթակներում, ինչպես նաև բազմաթիվ անգամներ հյուրընկալվել այս խորհրդարանում։
It was this conviction that led him to engage internationally and brought him out to this parliament on many occasions where he sought to present the aspirations and concerns of the people he represented.
Սիրելի գործընկերներ, 2023 թվականին Արցախի նկատմամբ ադրբեջանական վերջին ագրեսիայից, շրջափակումից և էթնիկ զտումից հետո մեր ընտանիքը տեղափոխվեց Հայաստանի Հանրապետություն։
Dear colleagues, following the Azerbaijan's aggression against Artsakh in 2023, the 9-month blockade and the resulting ethnic cleansing, my family was forced to relocate to the Republic of Armenia.
Հայրս մեզ հետ չեկավ Հայաստան, քանի որ իբրև պետական պաշտոնյա պարտականություն էր զգում ապահովել քաղաքացիական բնակչության տեղափոխումը և դրանից հետո միայն մեկնել Հայաստան։
But my father did not go with us. As a public official, he felt the duty and responsibility to remain behind and ensure the safe evacuation of the civilian population first. Only after fulfilling his responsibility did he intend to leave for Armenia.
2023 թվականի հոկտեմբերի 3-ին տեղեկացանք, որ Ադրբեջանի հատուկ ծառայությունները ձերբակալել են Արցախի ռազմաքաղաքական ղեկավարությանը, այդ թվում հորս։
But on 3rd October 2023, we learned that Azerbaijan security services had arrested the political and military leadership of Artsakh, including my father.
Ձերբակալումից միայն 10 օր անց մենք առաջին տեղեկությունները ստացանք հորիցս։ Այդ ընթացքում, ինչպես նաև դրանից հետո, մեր ընտանիքը անցնում էր հոգեբանական աննկարագրելի ապրումների միջոցով։
For 10 days after his arrest, we had no information about him. Only after those 10 days did we receive the first messages from my father. Since then, and throughout this entire period, my family has lived through a psychological ordeal that is impossible to fully describe in words.
Չնայած երբեմն կարճ հեռախոսազրույցներ ենք ունենում, սակայն մեր մտահոգություններն ու անհանգստությունները փարատված չեն։ Հորս առողջական վիճակի, պահման պայմանների, նրա նկատմամբ վերաբերմունքի վերաբերյալ, հաշվի առնելով նաև Ադրբեջանում մարդու իրավունքների վիճակը։
Although we are sometimes able to have brief telephone conversations with him, our fears and anxieties remain. We continue to worry about his health, the conditions in which he is being held, and the treatment he receives, especially given the broader human rights situation in Azerbaijan.
Արդեն 1000 օրից ավելի է մենք մշտական անհանգստության ու ծանր ապրումների մեջ ենք։
For more than 1,000 days, we have lived with constant uncertainty, fear, and profound emotional pain.
Ադրբեջանում մեկնարկած կեղծ դատավարության արդյունքում հայրս դատապարտվեց ցմահ ազատազրկման։ Սակայն կարծում եմ կարիք չկա անդրադառնալու այդ դատավարության շինծ ու բնույթին։
The sham trials initiated against my father in Azerbaijan resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment. However, I believe there is no need to explain here the fabricated nature of these trials.
Այդ գերիներից հայրս Ռուբեն Վարդանյանը ու Դավիթ Բաբայանը ցայնագրությունների միջոցով հայ հանրությանը փոխանցել են դատավարության կեղծ բնույթի մասին տեղեկություններ։
My father, together with Ruben Vartanyan and David Babayan, and all Armenian political prisoners held in Azerbaijan, have managed through recorded messages to inform the Armenian public about the realities of these proceedings.
Դրանք հանրազանուց են նաև այս խորհրդարանում։
These facts are also known to many of you in this parliament.
Փաստորեն, Միջազգային իրավունքի հիմունքներից մեկը հանդիսացող ժողովուրդների իրավահավասարության եւ ինքնորոշման իրավունքի իրացման պայքարի համար մարդիկ դատապարտվում են, իսկ դատապարտող պետությունը խուսափում է պատասխանատվությունից.
What we are witnessing is a situation in which individuals are being punished for defending principles that are among the foundations of international law, the equality of peoples and the right to self-determination. At the same time, the state carrying out these prosecutions continues to avoid accountability.
Հայաստանի եւ Ադրբեջանի միջև խաղաղության ընթացիկ բանակցությունները որևէ կերպ չեն անդրադառնում հակամարտության հումանիտար կողմին, չեն հանգեցրել հայ ռազմագերիների ազատ արձակմանը, թեև միջազգային պետության հայտնի գրեթե բոլոր խաղաղության համաձայնագրերը հանգեցրել են առաջին հերթին հենց ռազմագերիների ազատ արձակմանը, Ադրբեջանը հետևողականորեն խուսափում է դրանից.
The ongoing peace negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan do not address the humanitarian dimension of this conflict. They have not resulted in the release of the Armenian political prisoners. Yet almost every peace agreement in modern history has begun with the release of prisoners of war. Azerbaijan has consistently refused to do so.
Ինչպես հայրս է ասել, այս դատավարությունը ուղղված է Հայաստանի Հանրապետության դեմ, հետևաբար Բաքվում պահվող հայ ռազմագերիները այսօր Ադրբեջանի կողմից օգտագործում են Հայաստանի դեմ։ Այս հանգամանքը լրջորեն հարցականի տակ է դնում իրական խաղաղության հանդեպ Ադրբեջանի հանձնառությունը։
As my father has stated, these trials are not only directed against him personally, they are directed against the Republic of Armenia itself. The Armenian prisoners currently held in Baku are being used as instruments of political pressure against Armenia. This reality raises serious questions about Azerbaijan's genuine commitment to achieving a real and lasting peace.
Արգելի գործընկերներ, եւս մեկ անգամ շնորհակալություն հայտնելով այս հնարավորության համար, խնդրում եմ անել հնարավոր նպաստելու Ադրբեջանում պահվող հայ ռազմագերիների ազատ արձակմանը։
Dear colleagues, once again, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I respectfully ask you to do everything within your power to contribute to the release of the Armenian political prisoners held in Azerbaijan.
Հաշվի առնելով Եվրոպական միության ներգրավվածության ու հերահար նպատակների մեր տարածաշրջանում, ես լիահույս եմ, որ քաղաքական կամքի առկայության պարագայում Եվրոպական միության գործադիր իշխանությունը կարող է Ադրբեջանի վրա իրական ճնշում գործադրել այս հարցով։
Considering the European Union's engagement and long-term interest in our region, I remain hopeful that with sufficient political will, the executive institutions of the European Union can exert meaningful and effective pressure on Azerbaijan to resolve this humanitarian issue.
Մեր տանը հորս սպասում է մայրս, քույրս, եղբայրս, թողնիկները։ Վերջիններիս պատկերացումներ աշխարհի վերաբերյալ նրանց թույլ չի տալիս հասկանալ, թե ինչու իրենց պապիկին իրենց հետ չէ։
At home, my mother, my sister, my brother, and his grandchildren are waiting for my father. His grandchildren are still too young to understand why their grandfather is not with them.
Մի քանի օր առաջ աղջկաց ծնունդն էր։ Նրա համար ծննդյան լավագույն նվերը պապիկի զանգն էր։ Երբ հարցրեցին, թե ինչ նվեր է ուզում, ասաց, որ ուզում է պապիկը վերադառնատուն։
A few days ago, it was my daughter's birthday. For her, the greatest gift she could receive was a phone call from her grandfather. When I asked her what she wanted as a birthday present, she simply answered, "I want my grandfather to come home." Thank you.
I think it would be better to have the finish of these discussions in this conference among the speakers first, with the Mr. Shkanyan testimony. And I was about to ask you a question but I received the response at the very end. I was about to ask you if there are any other family members. It's very obvious there are. There is wife, other children, and grandchildren as well. If I understood correctly, there was 3 times or 4 times just for conversation. Is that what it was? You don't want to answer, okay?
Ամսական 3-4 կապված է այդ ամիս ինչքան է չեմ կարող ասել ստույգի չկա զանգերի օր
There is no such a regular number of communications. It can be per month, 4 calls per month. It depends on the circumstances of the context.
And what was the specific charge for which supposedly he was found guilty?
It has legal component. I'll try to address it. So first, we have not received the full judgment. We only have the extract of the judgment, which does not give us a possibility to understand the reasoning for the evidence which is supposedly relied by domestic courts. But overall, the core of the charge is formation of armed group, participation in armed group, terrorism, illegal border crossing. So Artsakh Republic is treated as unlawful armed formation, and any decision, any activity within this formation is equated to terrorism or other related grave crime.
Okay, thanks. Now, waiting for my colleague and co-host of this event, Madam Lexman, we have some time and maybe we can take advantage of that. If anyone wants to take the floor, maybe raise a question, a concern, or just views, feel more than free to comment. Let's have the first round, maybe 3 or 4. All right, please make it as short as possible, but certainly no more than 2 minutes. Let's start with the lady first. Would you tell us your name as well?
Yes. Hello, my name is Armenia, and I'm a member of Armenian community and living in Brussels and following all the situation very closely. And first of all, thank you very much for organizing this conference and keeping the question under the radar all the time. It's very, very important. And I have a question for you, Mr. Mavridis. Yes, as an MEP, of course, the European Parliament has repeatedly adopted resolutions calling for the immediate release of Armenian hostages, political prisoners in Baku, and stronger EU engagement. But what explains? So the question is, what explains the gap between the European Parliament calling, having this clear position on Armenian political prisoners and the relatively limited action taken by the European Commission? And of course, the second question is, how can Parliament convert its political position to make some pressure to keep this question under the priority of EU-Azerbaijan relations? Thank you.
Very good. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I will make your task easier because it's a common question that I'm going to pose now. I'm Uğiղ Bryusselum. I'm a European Commission Type A expert and member of the European Commission Expert Group for Implementation of EU Anti-Torture Regulation. And for the last 25 years, I work on human rights and torture-related issues. And since 2011, I work on Azerbaijan also. And for just being, I don't want to elaborate more on issues related to torture specifics, because we have a relative of a person who is imprisoned in the country, and it's unethical to go much deeper. But I want to bring a quote from the Council of Europe Committee on Prevention of Torture, which says, torture in Azerbaijani prisons is systemic, systematic, and endemic. And this is the Council of Europe. Systemic, systematic, and endemic. Endemic. So that's on the main page of Council of Europe CPT, and basically we have many evidences like this book, and we can very clearly claim, when I say we, many groups that work with prisoners of war, and especially Janusz worked with them, we have not a single prisoner of war who have returned to Armenia who wasn't tortured. All of them, with no exceptions. Some were light beatings or beatings, others were even very severe torture. So, but there was not a single case that any of the prisoners who returned to Armenia was not a victim of torture. So, just this for the record, for your message. Thank you.
We appreciate your contribution. Who wants to be the next one? I think that the young lady in the back wanted first hand.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this conference. My name is Sofia Shevchenko. I used to be a trainee in the European Parliament, and right now I'm very interested in the topic. I was in Armenia last month. I have lots of friends there, and I want to touch upon a subject that hasn't been discussed yet today, but I think it's also very important. On my trip last month, I visited the town of Goris, which is very close to the border with Azerbaijan. I talked to the community there, and people are telling me that a lot of young people are going away from border towns, going to Yerevan, going to the capital, or going even away from Armenia, because they don't have a certainty that they can start a life there, build businesses there, because there's still a lot of uncertainty that this region will not be affected in the future. We might also maybe be annexed. There are people who are afraid that Azerbaijan wants to have a border with Turkey, and that this is basically the region that will be affected first. So, of course, it's important to talk about the release of the prisoners, but how is the European Union, the Parliament, together with the other institutions, gonna work on the future and remain, have this peace be installed for a long time, so there is no impact for the regions bordering Azerbaijan, and that people can have a certainty that they can build businesses alive there and not go away from their home. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Who wants to be the next one? I saw a couple of hands, more than a couple of hands. The young man back, yes? Younger than me.
Yes, but my question has to do with the ECHR, European Court of Human Rights. I suppose the next step, now that the sentences have been handed out to the hostages in Baku, the next step would be the European Court of Human Rights. And is there, I presume the European Court of Human Rights will overturn verdicts, but is there any chance of that being enforced in Azerbaijan?
Thanks. Let's take one more. Yes? The young lady. Would you tell us your name, please?
I am Fidel Khachatran. I am a member of Armenian Society in Brussels. I am a medical doctor, not a political person. I would like to say, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this one. I am participating second time. Last year it was a small meeting, but we hope that something will change. Sorry, but nothing changed in practice. But today, thank you very much to Mr. Papashvili for pointing a lot of things that should be implemented. And also, Minister, don't come that you said that it is a genocide, really genocide in Artsakh. Thank you for it. But also I'd like to mention not only our prisoners issue, but also about Armenian heritage there. You know what happened there, and no UNESCO, no. And I'm very sorry for telling it that recently Madame Ursula von der Leyen visited Azerbaijan and said that Azerbaijan is a very reliable partner for gas provider. So, how, I'm not sure that really implementation, as Mr. Papashi said, will be very easy. Sorry for it and thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to talk? The young man.
Hello everyone, my name is Sam. I'm a journalist from Armenia. I also wanted to ask you about the recent visit of Ursula von der Leyen to Azerbaijan. When she was there on July 2nd, she praised Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev for the peace efforts, and she also talked about Azerbaijan being a very reliable partner. But she skipped talking about human rights issues in Azerbaijan overall, and of course nothing about the Armenian prisoners, not even Azerbaijani activists or journalists who are currently in prison there. So as we see, there is like a very big difference between European Parliament stance and the European Commission. Just anyone who wants to comment on that, thank you.
I don't know if any one of the MEPs was still present or the senator wants to comment. Or perhaps if no one from the MEPs or the senator, then I'll try to give a short response to the question which was not the only one, which was directed towards me, and then maybe some of the panelists I want to comment on some of the questions. I would start with one of the questions which was towards the end. The wording I use myself, if you listen to me here in the European Parliament, whenever I have the chance to talk to Madame von der Leyen or perhaps Madame Kallas or other commissioners, I can reassure you that it is much more harsh than the wording you are using. I've been around for 12 years. This is my third term. I cannot take it anymore. I cannot accept all this hypocrisy anymore. That's why I abandoned the diplomatic language, and perhaps that has even a political cost on me. That's not something to discuss now. As far as the European Parliament, though, position and what we might do next, how do we go to implement perhaps some of our resolutions, and one point regarding the International Criminal Court, for which I do have some experience, even though I'm not a lawyer. I'm a finance person. I'm coming from the academic world. I'm going to read paragraph 8, which was the last. It's very short, it's just one sentence, from the last resolution of the European Parliament to understand how much we can reach as European Parliament when it comes to matters concerning foreign affairs. We, the European Parliament, instruct the President, our President, Madame Metsola, to forward this resolution to the Council, the Commission, the Vice President, High Representative, the Member States and the Presidents, governments, and parliaments of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So in a way, the further we can get was once we have resolutions such as this one, which I repeat was almost unanimously voted for, we inform as far as our political positions, our EU institutions, governments and parliaments. We cannot impose or implement our political decisions. And last comment, regarding the International Criminal Court, I do believe that, I have no doubt that there is a case. The question is, how do you go about taking into consideration that, of course, we do have some legal experts here, very profound legal experts. How do you go about taking into consideration that Azerbaijan is a country that does not co-sign the Charter of International Criminal Court? And coming from Cyprus myself, I can reassure you that I have always been possessed with a profound and pathetic understanding of the pain of displacement, the threat of regional aggression, and the vital importance of historical justice. In 1974, I was myself a victim of such an aggression by the Turkish invasion in Cyprus, and I'm a refugee kid of that era. So all I can promise you, before I give the floor to anyone who wants to talk, is that personally, you have my commitment and my party and my political group that as far as us, you will never be alone. That's all I can promise. Yes, Simon?
Yeah, I would like to respond to maybe 3 questions. One about the European Court and how we can make Azerbaijan comply. Azerbaijan is one of the countries, member states of the Council of Europe, which has probably one of the worst records of enforcement of judgments. However, there have been situations where Azerbaijan has been forced to enforce judgments, and one of those situations involves a case called Ilgar Mamedov versus Azerbaijan. That was a case that related to a politically motivated imprisonment of a political opposition leader back in 2013 or 14, either 13 or 14. That's not important. What is important is that in this case, court issued a judgment and said that the person was in detention without proper justification as provided by the European Convention, and essentially asked Azerbaijan government to release him. And Azerbaijan refused to release him despite constant calls from the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. Committee of Ministers, as you know, is responsible for overseeing the enforcement of judgments. So what we did in that case was to initiate a campaign, and my organization led this effort, to start infringement proceedings under Article 46.4 of the European Convention against Azerbaijan. This was the first case of the kind when infringement proceedings were applied. And when they were initiated, this led to a release of Mr. Mamedov from jail, quashing of his criminal conviction, and he also received over 100,000 euro compensation from Azerbaijan. He eventually turned into a puppet opposition after all of this happened, but the fact is that Azerbaijan was somehow under the threat of consequences, meaning suspension of membership, to enforce the judgments. And same can be done in relation to the cases that we're discussing. First it's important to attain the judgments, and once the judgments have been attained, we can together create pressure on the Committee of Ministers to force Azerbaijan to comply. If Azerbaijan does not comply, there are measures that can be taken all the way to expulsion from this multilateral regional body. So there is a way. In terms of, Ursula von der Leyen praising and tapping Aliyev on his shoulders, You know, this is unfortunate. But what is also more unfortunate is that EU continues to rely on fossil fuels from countries like Azerbaijan, and instead of putting taxpayers' money on accelerating transition to renewable, it funds projects like Southern Gas Corridor. It's a waste of money, and it's a dependency which is unnecessary and which is a security threat for the energy security of the EU. So this is deeply flawed and wrong, and this kind of project should not be undertaken in the first place, and people like Aliyev should not receive the kind of treatment they received from the Commission President. It's clear. On the question of the ICC, you know, there are, I guess, from the non-lawyers questions that pertain to the jurisdiction of the court. This question has already been overcome by Armenia ratifying their own statutes, but also by Armenia filing a declaration under Article 12.3 of their own statutes and asking the ICC to extend its jurisdiction over the events that have taken place in Armenia, on the sovereign territory of Armenia, starting May 2021. My organization has documented multiple war crimes that have taken place on the territory of Armenia since the 2020 ceasefire, and again, relying on the jurisdiction of the court, jurisprudence of the court, the crime of forcible transfer falls under the jurisdiction of this court, even when it started on the territory that is outside the territorial jurisdictional scope of the court, but continues onto the territory of a member state. So jurisdictional question is closed. What we collectively need to do now is to encourage friendly states, first of all European states, to make a collective state party referral to the ICC, putting pressure, practical pressure, on the prosecutor to initiate investigation into multiple allegations of crimes, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, that Azerbaijan has committed since May 2021. So we have a jurisdiction, we need a little bit of mobilization of the political will, and then we can trigger this investigation. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to comment? Yes.
I'll provide a short comment about ECHR. Yes, we intend to take those cases to the European Court. Interesting and telling fact is that as of this moment we have a dozen completed cases against Azerbaijan where grave human rights violations were found by the court: torture, abduction, forced disappearances, intentional deliberate killings. And indeed, Azerbaijan fails to enforce the judgment, and trivially they fail to make the payment to the victims or their lawyers as defined by the court. And a rich country with budget refuses to make the payment as decided by the court, which relate to protection of ethnic Armenians. So we consider this as a continuation of state policy, discriminatory policy, racial discriminatory policy against Armenia. So it's a small manifestation, but it still shows the reluctance of the state to enforce a judgment which is beneficial to ethnic Armenian. But luckily, after the reform of the court through the Protocol 14, the enforcement mechanism is strengthened. The initial supervision is done by the political organ, committee of ministers, and when there is a deliberate refusal to enforce the judgment, there is a possibility of having these infringement proceedings opened. And whenever the court would establish deliberate refusal, then this is a ground for sanctioning the country within the Council of Europe. So I think if this state policy continues, then we have quite sound, strong grounds to initiate infringement proceedings.
Very nice. I'd like to welcome my colleague, Miriam Lexman. Very beginning, I made an introduction. I don't need to make an introduction again. Maybe you should. Let's see if we have a few minutes. Are you going to stay until 3:30? Yes, right. Sure. Okay. Anyone else who wants to take the floor? Yes.
You might maybe repeat the questions about the position of Ms. von der Leyen. Now that we have a number
Very good
of
suggestion.
party of Ms. von der Leyen is joining.
Okay. Should I summarize the questions myself? A couple of questions were directed towards me, and I will summarize them in the following way. We appreciate, very appreciate, what the European Parliament has done with 2 resolutions, and I would add to that with the determinant contribution of the Standing Rapporteur for Armenia. And with all those demands that we have. And then what do we do next? How do we go to implement those? How do we put pressure on other institutions, especially namely with regards to Madam von der Leyen, who with public statements, she appears to have prioritized the geopolitical, the energy relations with Azerbaijan. That was one. Another one was whether we could play some key role in pushing further the atrocities and this miscarriage of service, justice against the Armenian people in held hostages, with bringing the case on the International Criminal Court, especially with regards to the first part, or anything else you might comment. We would love to hear you.
Thank you very much. One of the reasons why I couldn't be with you, because we had lots of votes and different committee meetings, it's very packed today because we are finishing practically this week and we'll have a recess. But one of the reasons why I couldn't be with you was that in INTA, which is the International Trade Committee, we were discussing how we can help Armenia with to supplement the export opportunities we lost vis-à-vis Russia, or how to respond to the coercion from the Russian Federation, where we were trying to find ways how to open the European markets for your companies in order to support Armenia in this struggle, and also, I mean, that could also, I would say, improve the relation or strengthen the relation between EU and Armenia, which obviously both sides are happy about, but not about the reasons what happened and the coercion from the Russian side. So the European Union is obviously taking seriously the will of the citizens of Armenia to build closer ties with the Union, and we are finding ways. Of course, it's to a certain extent it's not easy from different reasons, and I don't want to explain it, but you all know the reasons. But why we are here today is practically to bring up a voice on the political prisoners held in Azerbaijan, people from Nagorno-Karabakh, and we don't want these people to be forgotten. And of course, it's our moral duty to do our utmost to make these people free. And the question was very right. I mean, how, and unfortunately I see it myself, that sometimes the geopolitical gains and priorities and energy needs and the diversification from Russia, which obviously in this case doesn't seem to be diversification, and also if diversification not in the right direction, when it comes to Azerbaijan. And unfortunately, I also regret that the European Union is not stronger here, because I think we have, or the EU has done the wrong way that we practically, because of our interests and energy interests, we have closed eyes on the political prisoners issue, and we could have done the opposite. We could have strengthened the position of the European Union through our cooperation with Azerbaijan when it comes to energy income, and thus make pressure on the government to release the political prisoners. I come from Slovakia, where there are a couple of people following these cases very closely. I mean, also the Slovak parliament, I mean, they were sending letters to the Azerbaijani government requesting the free of the political prisoners. I will keep bringing this issue up here, and if I see any opportunity, obviously I will try to make sure that the opportunity is used. Of course, I mean, this has to be done in a close cooperation with Armenia, and maybe the strategic thinking should be somewhere behind. Unfortunately, Ursula von der Leyen, while visiting Armenia, did not use the opportunity in order to be the strong voice against this breach of international human rights laws which are happening in Azerbaijan. So maybe this is what my main message is, that cooperation, coordination of steps, and obviously the pressure we need to keep, hopefully with a success in the future, and I hope that this will be as soon as possible. I come from Slovakia, you know that we had in my family political prisoners during the communist time, and that's why I'm motivated very strongly to do my utmost to make sure that these people will be free. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, you have the floor now.
Thank you. My name is Bruno Lalo. I'm an activist and journalist following this question since a long time. I met a few people here in Stepanakert before the blockade. You are saying, Ms. Lexman, that Ms. von der Leyen could use the energy deals with Azerbaijan and work towards more justice and peace. The problem is that she could do that in July 2022 before, during the blockade. She did not. Everybody warned her. It will be a blockade and then an ethnic cleansing. She did not listen. She is now doing it again, going to Baku, seeing Mr. Aliyev, and saying that he is a reliable partner. We all know that he is not a reliable partner. My question is then, what is the EPP group, the group of this von der Leyen, doing? It was her position in 22. We are now in 26. Excuse me to be frank, but what are you doing in 4 years' time if she does not move for a millimeter? Excuse me to be frank. That's my question.
Well, as you know, the European Parliament is only a supplementary voice in foreign policy. We don't have a mandate to do foreign policy of the European Union. This mandate lies with the member states. So maybe this question should go to the member states, because we in the European Parliament, as you could read in the resolution, we are very clear. And yes, it's true that there is maybe should be pressure from the European Parliament, but it's very difficult to make pressure from the European Parliament since we don't have the decision-making power. Who has it is the member states. If there will be a couple of member states who raise this question, that would lead to a change of the position for at least a millimeter, as you described. I mean, and also, I mean, you can imagine that trying to deal with so many issues, and unfortunately for many member states, the energy security is a priority, and that's why, unfortunately, and I'm not saying this is a right answer, but that's why they are getting sometimes human rights. And this is happening often on many different aspects, unfortunately, in the European Parliament, in the member states. We are often, or the European institutions are often talking about human rights, but the deeds are sometimes deviating from the virtues.
Yes, Gaspar, you have the floor.
Thank you for the questions, and thank you, Mr. Maurice, for this opportunity. I want just to note 2 points. The first one is the hypocrisy of the EU executive, and especially of the PAS and of Ms. Montenegro. There are resolutions of the European Parliament where it's mentioned that Azeri gas in reality is not Azeri gas, it's Russian gas. The European Union has put sanctions on Russia, and now we are paying more money to Azerbaijan to have this Russian gas, which would come direct to be cheaper, and we are sending to Putin more money. This is a very great hypocrisy. You did right, the European Parliament, I said earlier also, it's honoring its mission, but it seems that the EU continues to be hypocrite and to try to show that they are there. The second point is that how come some days after the announcement, the last announcement of Mr. Aliyev, during the summit in yerevan, that he stops any collaboration with the European Parliament, because the European Parliament is bigger than whatever all the other wordings that he used. And how come the President of the Commission goes to Baku and praises Aliyev when the only elected party by the people of Europe is considered by President Aliyev as that not worth to collaborate, and on the other hand, the European Union executive says Aliyev is a very reliable partner. Those are things that not only myself, maybe I can be considered not objective because I'm Armenian, but I imagine that many people in Europe cannot understand how come. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if anyone of you work together in that delegation with Mr. Mark Aristev that visited Baku and yerevan. You all know when there is an official meeting, when the cameras are there, people speak about the weather, how is the city, etc. They don't speak important substances. And what did Aliyev? As soon as they started, he has in front of him McAllister and 6 or 7 people from the AFET committee, and he said, you are more biased than the Armenian parliament, you are having resolutions only against us, and you are not writing yourself those resolutions, and those resolutions are written by the lobbyists of Europe, of the Armenian lobbyists in Brussels. Probably. Of course, I immediately responded that it's not understandable. People there were being prime minister, etc. They are not puppets there. But such a person, how can be considered reliable and good partner? For us, it continues to be ununderstandable. Sorry for my intervention, but on the other hand, I praise and I am very grateful as President of the European Armenian National Committee of all Armenians in Europe, 2 million Europeans of Armenian origin, for the European Parliament, and for His Excellency, Mr. Excellency, but on the other hand, the stance of the European Executive is not understandable for us. Thank you.
Very well. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Oh, sorry. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. This has been a very interesting discussion, presentation. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their contribution. To me, it was a learning experience. Of course, I'd like to thank my co-host, Madam Miriam Lexman, Kaspar, of course, and last word. I can reassure you that those of us, but also the cross-sectional support from more political groups, including the non-script, we are almost unanimously supporting these resolutions, and we are driven only, especially the European Parliament, we are driven by our values and faith in justice, and not by any special group interest. The reason why we are here is because we believe in the same values. With that word, I'd like to reassure you that we can rely on us as much as we can. And it's better to have a frank discussion like we did, instead of raising false expectations. Just a word of compassion. Aliyah Khaji, the relation position of Madam von der Leyen, is not the only one. Same thing, in other words, with Mr. Erdogan. But that is another case and another conference. I'd like to thank you for your presentation. And once again, this was made possible because of the cooperation between the two of us, the leading inspiration and organization by Kaspar Karbedian and his team, and also the very good experts on the time. Thank you, and please applaud.